How can assessment help in engaging students and unleash their intrinsic motivation?
I think that students do not like to be tested. Because then...
Ever?
Well, it depends a little bit on say, well, do you speak in terms of like exams? Or do you speak in terms of projects, which is different, say more the general assessment instead of the actual exam kind of form. They do not really like it. But maybe, as I said before, providing exams is very important for other reasons. Namely, to provide evidence that you achieve the minimum level of competence, which is very important for students to show to the outside world. But also, students want to be sure that if they put in effort and time and all their cognitive abilities into acquiring a degree, which becomes more and more important in the future, and there is students who did not put in the effort, who did not have the cognitive ability, and they could pass anyway, that would not be fair for students amongst one another. And they really react to this, I know, from a case that we know from say, psychology at University of Amsterdam, in which they said, well, for year one, we want to introduce compensating testing. So if you have a 4 for exam A, but you have an 8 for exam B, then they can be compensated so that you have, on average, a 6 or a 7, so you can pass. It were the students who were opposed to this measure because they said, oh, but that's not fair, because students who got a 4, they are, how do you call it? They have an advantage over students who scored higher. And they were very much afraid, they said, the student union, that the outside world and they themselves thought that the level of their education would be lowered, which they were really opposed to. So yes, it's both. They do not like it, but they think it's a necessity, and it's an important necessity.
But if we look at modern education programs, then modern education programs have changed from an input model of learning, so many hours on this particular discipline, so many hours on that discipline, so many weeks in this particular practice rotation, to an outcome-based model of learning in which we define the outcomes at the end of training. And the outcomes are then monitored throughout the curriculum. And what we then need is more longitudinal forms of assessment.
So you can check your progress.
You can check your progress. And I think that's really important. That's really important because every teacher will recognize that if learners will have had a particular subject in the first year and they come to the third year, by God, they don't know anything about that anymore. So you have to look at it more longitudinally, more developmentally. And we're not used to doing that.
I think it's very important, and that is what I put into practice in my teaching and what my department is very much focused on, that we diversify our assessments. We have been in the situation approximately 7 to 8 years back where we noted that a type of very inviting kind of assessment during a course was very similar across courses. In almost all courses, students were demanded to develop an idea and to explain in a summarizing way how they would tackle that idea in research. That's, of course, a kind of format that can be done in many courses, but students got totally bored because this was, again, concept, linked to theory, operationalize, research, interviews, survey, experimental, too similar. So we now concentrate on curriculum-wise that assessments are linked to different types of assignments. So in some cases, in my course, for example, the very first one in the first year is partly critical reading of a paper in a very structured way. That's one type of assessment. To confront the students already in the second week how well they read. But in the third week, they get a far more open type of assignment to write a paper about a day-to-day experience they have in, it's called breaking the rules in nonverbal communication, and to observe what happens when they, for example, stand too close to someone else in the elevator, how other people deal with that communicatively. So different type of assessment, and at the end of the course, a combination of open questions and multiple choice exams.
Yeah.
Well, students in particular like to be assessed, well, research says so, if the task they have to do for an assessment, may it be an MC question or may it be a project, resembles as much as possible the actual task they would encounter in the workplace or in research when they have done their studies or in the society as a whole. Research shows that such kind of tasks, in particular I like projects for this, or problems-based learning or whatever, they like those kinds of assessments the most, I think.
Should feel relevant for them.
It's the most relevant, they have time to adapt, there's intermediate feedback, they can learn with peers, they can work on societal relevant cases or workplace relevant cases. Yeah, I think they like that the most.
You also see that when assessments are positioned in the professional context, they are more willing to work harder.
Why is that?
Because they want to become with us to become a good doctor.
Yeah, so it's easily for them to connect it to the future practice.
Yeah.
I think that one of the most fundamental problems in education is the problem of transfer. That is, if you think you have learned something, you cannot automatically apply it to when you need it.
Yeah.
So this is a very fundamental problem in education. That's why modern education programs actually allow learners to constantly practice with transfer, basically through the provision of authentic tasks, either in projects, or in cases, or problems. And you challenge the learners, and then you get them engaged.
Yeah.
And the effect of engagement is that you want to do more of it, and time doesn't really count. And that's what typically modern education programs do. They challenge through provision of interesting tasks where you actually pay attention to transfer. You constantly pay attention to transfer. That's the basis of, for example, problem-based learning.
Yeah.
You provide a problem as a challenge for the learning. And naturally, for a medical student, that will be different from an engineering student. The problem will be different. That's why in engineering they work a lot with projects.
Yeah.
But it's through this engagement that you get good learning and good assessment. And intrinsic motivation is more a learning outcome than a precondition.
So that's a complication in assessment, that if you have a trajectory in mind across your course, towards the end of the course, you need to compromise every now and then on your actual grading policies.
Yeah. And they, of course, need to feel that the stakes are not too high on the first assessment. There's room for improvement.
That's true indeed. Motivational theory
Yeah.
coming into the room again. Yeah.
But I think our system is built in such a way that it leads to a lot of extrinsic motivation, particularly in assessment. With, you know, it's a domino game of doing all the hurdles, and that doesn't bring a lot of engagement.
Students who are high on competence motivation really like the quiz character of assessment, to be confronted with where they are. Other students prefer assessments that are more playful. That for me is one of the things I'm not really successful in developing, but that's top of my mind to invest more in doing that, to have a kind of more playful interaction in assessment. Maybe also using parts from what we know from playing digital games. It's a bit fashionable nowadays to talk about gamification of teaching and gamification of assessment, but I think there is a way to go there, and at Erasmus University we have some examples where that has been put into practice, and I think the results are promising. Working with the Battle app, for example, is a way to appeal to that kind of playful dealing with the material you have to learn anyway. But we should also take into account that in many fields classic rote learning is becoming less and less important. I'm a bit traditional, that I in my teaching emphasize very much that they need to know many central concept theories, etc., from the top of their head. So that's that results in a kind of rote learning. But of course, the 21st century skills they need to develop demand different things.
Yeah.
In addition to that, and also things that are a little more difficult to assess because we don't have the toolbox ready.
No, true.
But that's so nice about working at a university at this particular moment in time, that I think we're making a kind of move towards that kind of development.
Yeah.